Hello and welcome to Michael Chekhov Masters Talk. And today our topic is auditioning from home. And I am Lisa Dalton with the National Michael Chekhov Association, and my co-host is
Joerg Andrees from the Michael Chekhov International Academy in Germany. And we have also now here Ophir as a guest.
I'm here and I'm in Israel.
Two guests we have today. One is Paul Baywick, and Paul was one of my first certified teachers in Florida, not the first certified teacher for the National Michael Chekhov Association in Florida. And then the other guest that I have is Gail Cronauer. And there's Miss Gail Cronauer. She was our first NMCA certified teacher in Texas. And I'm very excited, Gail, I'm hoping that you have some special tips for us today. Share with us a little bit about your experience, because Gail has a film that's now available on Amazon Prime, a new independent film, and one of the reviews that she got is calling for Hollywood to make sure they see this movie and nominate her for an Oscar, because they feel it's the only Oscar-worthy supporting role that they've seen this year, and because of Gail's extraordinary work. So Gail, I know, has had to do quite a few auditions at home and is an amazing teacher in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so she might give us a few tips, but I'm going to launch this process by saying just our last session, where we focused on the creative process for the audition. I laid out a great deal of my step-by-step sort of structural 3 A's of approaching, understanding the atmosphere of the work, understanding the archetype of the character that you're bringing forward, and the fundamental action and activities. And so I'm going to turn this over to Joerg to launch into the special tasks that the creative process calls for when you are preparing your audition to be delivered from your home via some sort of on-camera process. So Joerg, would you please share with us your pathway?
Okay, thank you, Lisa. I will just start with some points, and maybe in the conversation we can add and weave it together to some more full picture of such a process. I think this is a little bit special to do it at home, and then you have mostly your mobile phone as your camera, as I have seen it very often with the people. And then the people buy a stand for the mobile phone, and they buy a lamp for the mobile phone so that the light is right. So there is a kind of a technical equipment you have also to manage to bring it to the right picture then. And then it is also the point that you may get a monologue, and or you get a dialogue. And of course, this is different, these things. How can you act with a dialogue alone at home? So I have seen people, they invited some other friends and they made a Zoom meeting, and the other friend is reading, the partner, and this actress is preparing her part. And then they record that at the same time as a kind of a video, but without seeing the other partner. With it only have the sound. And sometimes you have that also, that you have, when you can have someone at home, then this person is reading it into your acting. So that's a frame. And this is, on the other hand, also a very special situation, because you are not only responsible for your own acting, you are also responsible for that technical process. And you are also responsible for that, how it looks like then, and how you can see the size. You have to arrange that in this way, and all of that things, and you have to think about, you can't move the camera in this little process. And so you have to make a lot of decisions what has to do with the technical side of that process. And this can take off easily the people from the artistic process. I have seen that. And a point of that involved in that is also the relationship to the camera. I have here my camera. And what is the relationship to the camera? How do I relate myself to that camera? Shall I take the camera as a partner, and shall I speak to the camera and looking directly in it, or shall I look a little bit over it, and shall I speak in this way? And then I have the feeling sometimes very easily I do it for the camera. Question mark. Do I do it for the camera, or for whom do I do it? For whom am I doing it? And I found, and maybe you have some other suggestions, that it is maybe helpful to prepare first your part and have it, and don't prepare it in front of your camera, and prepare your part through several steps. And maybe we come back to it also for such self, how you call that? Home audition, yeah? Home audition, okay. You prepare your part, and then you do another step to do it in front of your mobile phone, or in front of the camera when you have such a camera, and go to that process. And there it is, from my understanding, very helpful that you do your work, and you do your work in a free way into the space. Of course, because it is filming, you are not moving so much, and you make not big masks, and it's quite clear, and we don't need to speak about that. And you have a more silent movement. You will have movements. I hope you will have movements. And then you take the camera as someone who is also there, but not that you do it directly to the camera. Maybe you have other suggestions. I would be very much interested how you feel about that. The camera is someone, something, someone. No, it's not someone. It's something what is there and what is looking at you. And you can be aware of it. You have to be aware of it, so that you feel that there is a kind of your sensation that there is a camera, but it is not that you directly have as a camera in this way as a partner. With your mobile phone, you don't have a cameraman behind. And when you have a cameraman behind, then it's easier to make a contact through that camera to a person, to someone who is there, who is perceiving you. You don't have it. You have a kind of an imaginary partner there. You do it for this person. The same as when I speak to you now here, you are not there. Nobody's there. Yeah, I can see, look out of the window, I see some people there. But you are there and there and there and there. And you're looking to me too. And I'm aware of it. But it's different from that when you would be directly here. So I have that this I, what is watching me, I respect it, I have it, and I'm working with it so that I also can have a nice movement to the side and not need always to be front if I would like to do it in acting. It depends, of course, to the text you have. So this is this side, and then maybe later I can speak about that, the preparation for it, because I think there are some moments what I like very much to suggest, like the inner gestures and the hand and finger gestures and the feet gestures, even when they are not seen.
So I'll just kind of flesh this part out a little of what I was receiving from you, Joerg, and I love this idea of preparing the part separately before you come to work with the technology. And I too have seen, and I would say I myself have been subject to getting lost in the technology and placing the technology over the art. And so I think Mr. Chekhov's first suggestion would be to make friends with the concept, to fall in love with and to apply the four brothers of beauty, ease, entirety, and of this form, to fall in love with the problem of this form. And it's an interesting thing that people say a certain amount of the industry standard has lowered, in that they are now accepting a disembodied, mechanically delivered voice, a friend through the telephone, or a friend through your video computer, and they're tolerating more of the environment, but it is important nonetheless. The more professional that we can make it, the more respect the work, the technology, the more respect for our art. And yes, a dynamic and wonderful performance can override weaker technology to at least get you to the next level. And if you have real technological limitations, then it becomes even more important, I think, to embrace the gifts that Michael Chekhov brings. And that includes this concept of understanding form and understanding that the form of everything in the visual line is going to communicate. So I have behind me a chart, but I also have a clip on the chart, right? And I have an edge on the chart. And I have a point where if I come here, I've got a line coming straight out of my head. And I've got, if I come here, I've got a part of the chart coming out of my head as opposed to coming over here. But being over here now creates three or four lines of verticality, which can battle to upstage me. It's like the visual image has its own climax. So this kind of pattern, like I'm here intentionally sharing attention with the chart, that's an intent. So you want to make sure if I really just wanted your attention fully on me, I would not have anything that is going to battle. So if we want to remember our rock art and composition, we have a foreground, we have a connecting stone, we have the focal point, we have support stones, we have a conflict stone, and we have background. And when we create these home environments, we don't want all that. because that creates an interesting and exciting line that keeps the eye moving. And what we'd like is for the eye to keep coming to the focal point, you yourself and your work. So if anything becomes those elements, it would be your body, which would lead into what Joerg is saying is you know, if I bring my hand closer to the camera, it's very different than if my hand is further away from the camera, and it makes a greater impact on the form in this medium there. So these things, my hands become support stones or connecting stones or points of conflict there to create dynamic, and that always keeps the energy on and focus on you and the creation that you're offering. So falling in love with the technology, and it is my recommendation that if you're in your home, that you have ready by you somewhere in your home an area that is absolutely always available for you to convert into your little home studio. And when you have that area, getting the opportunity to create a self-taped home audition is not so stressful, because you have a certain standard technology. I know exactly where I'm going to place my camera. I've got the light there, and I've got a big drape that I just hang across when I need to. So it takes me 10 minutes to set up my technology. And that's just a standard. I created that before I had any home audition to do, so that I would have it. When I travel with a little stand, little video stand. And when I go to a hotel room or I go to a guest's home, I scan it and I look if I had to do, and I've done them. I did one in Berlin. I did one in California in Pasadena when I was there. I did one in the hallway of a stairwell of a city, you know, because the building that I was staying in, there was no way to do it there. So you find places to, you know, when you're an artist who actually has this coming up for themselves in their lives, you start looking for just, you know, in advance, gosh, if I'm going to be here for several days and I get an audition, where might I do it? So that you are already, you have a strong preparation, which is going to make your action less stressful. And when we talk about the relationship to the camera, always, again, making friends with the camera itself as a witness, as Joerg said, and making sure that you have an eye line, which is what we call it in English. The eye line is where is your focal point, where you're looking, and test that. Again, when you do a practice setup for your technology, test, do I look like I'm off camera if I'm right here? Do I need to be here? How far can I go? Record it so you can see. You always want to be able to see two eyes. If you get past losing the upstage eye, you've gone too far for any communication. So the farthest you would ever want to go is what? You need to find that. Where is that? So doing a practice recording so that you have already established for you an understanding of how far and where do I lose the contact and how close can I get, literally in inches. And you may need to make a big piece of tape or an X so that your eye will automatically be drawn to it, to give yourself a clear focal point so that you can come back to it. And little subtle things like, you know, placing your characters in, if you have two characters, where are they distinguished where they are? All of that, we'll talk more about the actual preparation there. And I love this question of for whom am I doing this in terms of the physical, working with the eye line, and also just reminding yourself for whom am I even doing this audition. And remember that you are able to imagine while you're preparing. Just take a few moments to imagine connecting your ideal artistic center through the cosmic space to those spectators who will watch this. So keeping the spectator in mind there, and remembering that, as Joerg was saying, you know, I can put my hand behind your head right now, but I cannot put my hand behind your head.
Important to have that making friends with it, and at the same moment also when you do it, you do a little piece of art. I like this very much, this term. You are, or I am an artist, and what I do, I like it, what I do, and I have joy with it, and I do it as a piece of art. And this is part of that making friend with this situation, even when you are at home and you have some stress because you have to deliver this video in 2 hours or whatever it is. And so that can give you more the trust to yourself. What I'm doing, I will do it well. It is as it is, and I'm not giving me too much stress. I have seen in such situations, then it was so interesting. I have done online rehearsal for an audition with someone, and then the recording was done by this actress without me, by herself, and she had someone who was speaking through the internet to her, the second part. And in the rehearsal, we could manage these subtle processes so that one can see in the face and in the body very subtle reactions and preparations for the text, what this character had to speak to the other person. And that was, from my point of view, it was a nice balance of the tempo, how the words were given, how the thoughts and the emotions were created by the tools of the Chekhov technique, inner gestures, atmospheres, and all that things. And later I saw that recording, and then it was interesting. It was okay, it was good, but all these more subtle reactions, all that perception of there is something going on in the mind of this person. There's something going on with the feelings with this person. That was gone, not fully. It was still there, but it was limited. And I found that, yeah, that's a big question. What easily can happen that when we come to the recording, that we then are easily pushing it, forcing it, and don't trust anymore so much the work we have done before. That's the point I would like to hear also your opinion, even maybe also from Gail. How is that the process? What can we do, and how can we manage to overcome that? Or better to say, really stay in the trust of your work you have done when you have prepared this part.
I love Lisa and Joerg, when you're talking about the audience, because for so many of us as actors, we move between stage and screen, or we hope we move between stage and screen. And even if we don't do a lot of stage work, we're in a classroom oftentimes where it becomes a small stage for us. And making the adjustment for self-taping auditions or even work on film on a regular basis can be a huge challenge to us. And one of the things that I explore in my own work and with my students is the whole idea of playing to an audience of one. And that one is the camera, and the camera is the spectator that you welcome into your studio, into your world, into your work. And when you talk, Joerg, about that, losing the subtlety, I think a lot of that has to do with another point that Lisa raised, and that was the one of focal point. Where are you focused? We have to work as directors when we're creating these self-tapes. And I think, Lisa, you spoke beautifully about that. We're composing a shot that we are aware of. This is our stage, our set, but it's also the world that we're presenting to the viewer, to the casting director, to the agent, to the director. So for me, staying aware of where I am focusing becomes so important, not just about eye lines, but about getting out of my head, that circle of concentration one, and into the space, which is the other. And that might be circle of concentration two, is the other person, but it can also be the atmosphere, which you've taken great pains, hopefully, to imagine, to create for yourself. It can be four, it's that other very specific memory I'm having. And that when I allow myself to trust the work that I've done on those circles of concentration, if it's one in the context of the scene and not, oh my God, I hope I'm doing okay. And if it's two, it's on the other of my imagined scene partner or my real scene partner. It's not looking at the camera, and that is my two. So being very specific about my circles of concentration, my focal point, and this audience of one, so that it's a very intimate exchange, even if I'm playing in a medium shot, which sometimes we're asked to do, but more and more the auditions that we're doing are here, close-ups. And that's what they want. They might want a slate where you reveal your whole body, but what they want to see is what's going on here. And Joerg, when you talk about the gestures in your feet or your hands that may not be visible to the camera, but are transformative to the actor, I think that's so important. If I'm rambling, just tell me and I'll stop. But I'm just thinking about, you were talking about doing auditions at home, and I've not done very many during this whole pandemic because there was not a lot of work casting, but I've done 3 or so. And the most exciting one I did was for a film that may or may not ever happen. And there were 3 wonderful scenes that I was preparing. And I took great pains to do all the preparatory work that you're talking about, Lisa. The first scene was in a car after a very tense meeting with the principal of my grandson's, actually my great-grandson's teacher. He's being bullied in school. And I set the chair in a way, and I had a chair that gave me a sense of a seat in a car. And I had to imagine where my son and my grandson, who was in the back car, were. So where I placed my focus, looking out the windshield, but talking to my son, talking to the grandson in the back, was all so important to me, and how I was sitting, and what was going on, how my knees were squeezed together, and how I'd look out the window. So all of that physical life in that very close shot was really important. And the second scene was in my bed, and my grandson, who fears that he's maybe gay. He's young, he's 8 years old. And I went, how am I going to do this? So I changed the angle, and I got an old fuzzy robe, and I took a pillow that became this young boy that I could hug, and allowed myself to then explore archetypal gestures with this, and rehearsing that and then shooting it in a way that allowed me to do that was so important. And the third scene was outside, very different atmosphere. And I'm smoking. She's got throat cancer, but she continues to smoke. And somebody hands her a small, very small shot of whiskey. And so I got a little teeny cup that you might use in the bathroom and put it on a stool so I could reach over and get it and show this little cup and chug the drink and then go back to the cigarette. So the atmosphere and the use of props and my relationship with the other person who was giving me these gifts was central to what I was doing. So again, Lucy, you're talking about the atmosphere, you're talking about the archetype. This character, even though she's dying, is a hero, and exploring how she could be heroic in this plot that she hatches to perhaps save her great-grandson's life, or at least contribute to his well-being, was incredible. The film takes place in Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh, born in Pennsylvania, this is one of the states in the USA, is called the City of Champions. So I went online and did some research about Pittsburgh and went, whoa, and she likes baseball and she is a hero. So the archetype was so important. And then the actions, the activities with the smoking, with the hugging, with the looking out the window, all became a central, crucial part of the work. So I don't know if that addresses what you were asking, but the process was, I always feel that when I do a self-tape audition, man, this is it. This is the performance. This is the piece of art. And I'm saving this. This is on a cloud. And if I need to come out and take a look at it again and analyze it or share it with someone, I have it. And I always feel like, whoa, I did that. And if I got the role, that's icing on the cake. But the process of creating it is so expanding. It's so joyful, to use your word, Joerg. And when I keep that in mind, and I allow myself to be present right here, doing this, creating this, it's successful. Whether I get the role or not, it's successful. And that's a good day when I do one of those.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful demonstration. It was great to even to see it. We could purely see how it was, in even with this rough demonstration. It was fantastic. Thank you very much, Gail. This is the point you have just explained, that that the full body is involved, and this can sometimes easily get lost, that one is too much in the head and won't make it right and won't express emotions. But the full body is involved and has to have the gestures one is preparing, and one can do so much with a full body involving for the expressions in the face, in the eyes, in this atmosphere, when one is involving the full body for that. And also especially when it is not seen, as your pillow is not seen, and also the feet gestures. When it is connected, when the full body is connected, then it's visible in the eyes, then it's visible in all your subtle muscles of your face. That's so important. Thank you very much, Gail.
You're welcome.
Gail, I had a question. Did you have was it dialogue?
Oh, right. Yeah, they were, there was a lot of dialogue, and I had my life partner who lives with me, who's not an actor, read off camera, very close to the camera, so that my eye line comes back to the camera. What you were saying before, Lisa, about having both eyes visible. Yes, very important. But if it's always this, that can get a little monotonous. So to have, there's what's here, what's there, atmosphere, very specifics of place, but putting my off-camera reader close to the camera and making sure that he doesn't speak too loud, because sometimes that happens. I'm not a fan of working with somebody over the internet or a recorded voice, although if you read the instructions that come to us on self-tapes now, people will say, if you have to do that. So you're right, the standards of the industry have been greatly compromised in terms of what they will accept, so the quality of the actual work, but also the technical quality. Now that's going to change, because we've had a couple of months to get ready to prepare for this. And I think that people are going to begin to be expecting better quality tapes, not only in terms of the performance, but in terms of the technical quality too. They want people to be able to shoot at home. Now this is for commercials mostly, but that's a whole other thing that actors are going to have to be dealing with at some point. So yes, to answer your question, there was somebody there, and that's very helpful to me.
Great. So I wanted to pitch in just a few more technical things about working if you don't have someone there, but you have someone to rehearse with, and perhaps this would have been helpful, Joerg, in the situation where you did an online rehearsal and then the person taped and they lost that vitality and dynamic. On the certainly on Zoom, but it's also possible on other platforms, it is possible to hide your own self view so that you do not need to see yourself speaking. And if you had one partner, you would pin, or you would pin them. You would make sure that that you can see them and you just see them and you don't see yourself. And that way, because you've rehearsed, you know where your frame is, you know that you're not going to be over here, or if you are over there, it's because you intend to be off camera or making an entrance in some way. So just to know of these technical tasks, you want to rehearse without seeing yourself, so that then if you actually record without a partner live, that you are, part of what happens is when you're seeing yourself, or like right now I am seeing myself, and my focus is fractured into checking, you know, that director, that cinematographer is making sure that I'm in frame and all of that. And so if I don't see myself, it's just a whole lot easier for me to communicate with you, to look at a green point on my computer screen. I'm not busy down here looking at myself talking to you and disengaging. So this, you know, psychological studies have showed that there is a strain on the brain that happens when we are trying to communicate with others and simultaneously watching ourselves. So turning off this self-view and getting accustomed to working with the camera, then not being able to see yourself the way it is in a real recording environment.
This just going back a little bit to that point with arm and finger hand gestures and the feet gestures. So it's a very little detail, but it can be very helpful when you have done another preparation we will talk about, that you also explore for yourself that you can make with your hand a strong expansion and you can make a contraction. And when your full body is connected, you will immediately sense that this expansion in your hand is also reflecting in your toes. It's also reflecting in your head, in your eyes, when you create this connection. And the contraction gives you also a different sensation of a strong contraction when you do that with your hand. You will not show it. It's just here, if you have such a shot. And you can play with that as a help for yourself with expansion, contraction, or other gestures, even holding the hands and pulling that, for instance, or pressing them. So this gives, one has to be very careful that it is not too full, that the shoulders and all that is there, but you will sense immediately when you do something with your hands and you allow that there is something happening, embracing with one hand the other, or giving a little slightly push to the other hand. This has always an influence to your full body inside in the inner streams of your life body. And this is very nice even to explore for yourself, for your creative process, and to play with it. It's just a nice game so that you can stay in this ability that you act the part and you play with your part. So, but there is something, of course, much more to do in the beginning when you get the script and how to work with that. Maybe, Lisa, you start with that point.
Okay. The moment we get the script, we are filled with images of it, and we read and we read and we read. We read every single detail on the script and everything, the page number, is it interior, is it exterior, where is it, what is it, so that we can really formulate an understanding of what these atmospheres are. And we know that the atmosphere will change in each scene, otherwise the scene doesn't exist, because every scene is a part of a whole, and it's a point on the storyline, and it carries essential information that is part of the whole. So we, if possible, we really want to understand the point of the scene, and that's literally the reason the scene is in the story to begin with, and where the specific moment is, the point where the point is made, if you will, to know exactly that moment, because that is normally where the atmosphere will shift. And
I think you should fix your video and take off the fixation of mine.
yes, thank you. So we understand that there's an actual point in the scene where everything turns, and that is the reason that the scene is in the story. And it's most important that that is clear, that we understand why the scene is here, how this part fits into the whole. And for the artist who can understand the larger scope of the story, to get a feel, and you may be able to get that from reading a little bit of the scene that precedes it and a little bit of the scene after it, if you have that information and nothing else. It may be completely other characters coming from somewhere else, but something as simple as fade to or cut to will start to inform you of the artistic vision of what the atmosphere is. If you see a big crash happening in the scene before you, and then you're in a hospital room where it's very, very quiet, you understand the polarity that you're being asked to create. And you wouldn't want to start that scene at a high level if the intent is to show the polarity between this violent crash and this very still hospital room. So looking and understanding all the images that are there and allowing yourself to live into those images so that you can fill out the atmospheric environment and begin to understand what is the driving through line of this particular scene. And when we're in auditions, that becomes more important than trying to craft the entire arc of the character. It's more central to understand the arc of this particular scene. If you get multiple scenes, then you do want to understand where they are in relationship to each other, what might have happened in between, and how has the relationship between myself and the scene partner. If it's I'll go back to Gail. If it's her grandson and she's in 3 scenes with her grandson, they take place, she will be given the audition that shows the extreme points of their relationship, because the casting people, the directors, want to see the most critical points, and they want to see if the actor can evolve and show an arc. And so when you have multiple scenes, then it really becomes important that you make sure they have a relationship with each other. This essential type that Gail referred to, this essential essence, for her, the hero. 3 other very common archetypes for today: the villain, the victim, and the witness or bystander. So that doctor taking care of the person who was in the crash, that is that bystander. And they have to have the essence of doctorness. They can't have an essence of a homeless person, of the orphan. They need to have the essence of doctorness. And so making sure you have that, the essence of this specific character. If you have time, then the details of how you reveal that in terms of line, thinking, feeling, willing, straight lines, curves, direct, indirect, the blocking, you could say, or the directing, crafting of how you reveal characterization. It all becomes secondary to the requirements of meeting the basic type, because the type is what is carrying the story there. And then, as we've spoken about, you really want to understand all the activities. And if an activity is described in the text, she looks off to the window and comes back. She takes a long drag of her cigarette there. That's a clue, and it is to be embraced and not avoided. You think everybody's going to do it. Everybody's going to pause at this word. So I'm not going to. I'm going to pause over here. And this is basically denying the gift of guidance that the text is giving you. And we definitely want to make friends with and fill, in the TV show NYPD Blue, that show contained every pause, every stutter written into the script. And you got to the next level of your audition only if you did every single pause and stutter that was in that script. And that TV show and the way it was shot and the way it was written changed episodic television forever. And so it's just an example of how much a detective we want to be of the material itself, and find multiple different ways, as we mentioned before. Do it wrong, do it big, do it very, very subtly, the veiling process. Find the polarity and settle on that manner, and then practice it, rehearse it very, very well. And again, I love, Joerg's idea to prep it outside of the technology, and then bring the technology in, get that set up, and then rehearse it again. Make sure you do just for the art, so that when you're able to let it roll, you've done all your tech rehearsals, and now you can once again restore your contact with the art.
That's interesting. With the text is also giving very subtle or very clear sometimes some inner gestures. It is, of course, one has to be a detective or what, to understand the text, what is going on there. And one step, all depends to the time you have, but it could be very helpful to read the text under the umbrella of different tools. For instance, you have found out the atmosphere or what you said, and then you read and speak the text with this creating the atmosphere. Then you read and speak the text just doing all the businesses, the actions. Be very much aware about the actions. And if you have time, you can also go to find out, reading the text just from the type, from the archetype of type, different moments of working with the text, for what aim? To overcome your very first interpretation of the text. That you see that each text has many abilities how to interpret it. What is the background of it? What is going on inside of this person? So that one can find out where is a change from one sentence to the other, a change of inner mood, a change of thought. Very often our thoughts changing, but this is a movement. And can I come to that point that I recreate, even with a kind of a psychological gesture, this change of a thought, so that I have it then around me in this atmosphere. And this gives that I can work with the text really very, in this way, let's say, intelligent. No, you understand what I mean, that you become aware that the text is not only word by word, saying something, what the words are saying. Mostly, this is not so important. More important is that what you explore, what through the words is delivered about this character. Yeah, that's, for instance, reading the text with under different, I say umbrella of atmosphere, umbrella of type, umbrella of images of the text, and so on. From different points of view, try to explore the text so that you also find out more about that psychology of this person without analyzing, because you get it then really through your experience more clear how it feels like. And of course you said already that with the polarity and the climax, all that things we have discussed in the first video is of course important to go to.
No, I would just like to ask a question about quality of movement along when you're talking about the atmospheres. Do you work on any of that as well along with it?
One of the central things, and this is making sure you reveal that you have emotional capacities if the role calls for an expression of emotional capacities. So if it calls for heavy authority, intense authority, if it calls for tearful vulnerability, if it calls for, you know, if it calls for these emotional qualities, then it is important that they are revealed. And if it says they cry, the character cries, you need to cry. And if the character needs to rage, then you need to rage. We need to be prepared as artists to utilize our qualities, our breathing sensations, and things like that in order to very quickly access and reveal and convey in the veiled form or to the degree of unveiling that the style calls for. So if it's comedy, the crying is going to be very different than if it's drama. And but we do need to have that, and that's where a full rehearsal just working with the emotional qualities. Mr. Chekhov himself suggests that a shortcut to the part is to baptize each part of your text with the emotional quality of it, and you can use the qualities of movement, the kinds of movement of molding, flowing, flying, and radiating as qualities to help you with the emotional qualities, and and especially if you have any sort of, if the scene has a great deal of one particular energy, like this character is seriously mad for the whole scene, you obviously need to use expansion, contraction, and veiling, and make sure that your rage has a turning point, it has a peak, it has a subtle and a crescendo, a diminuendo. You take it down where you think it should be high, so you find the polarity of it. Whisper in your rage. Find that big range of qualities within the emotional range if you have an extended period of time in one particular emotion. And then it's also really interesting to use qualities. I mean, certainly if you have any sort of you would use imaginary bodies as well, especially if you had any sort of appendage. I mean, like Gail was talking about having cancer and smoking. So she's just, as a Chekhov trained actor, you might not even think of it. You just automatically would put on the imaginary body of this cancer patient. And so any kind of physical alteration, it's very good to practice with your imaginary bodies or centers, and definitely working with the qualities. So much of it depends on your particular length of the material, how much memorizing you need to do. I always recommend memorizing the last, from the end, to take the last 2 lines, then go back to the last 4 lines, last 6 lines. Work on your hardest scene first if you have multiple scenes. Don't have to shoot them in order, and try different, degrees of veiling so that you can find where you're really comfortable. And there's that tendency of they're looking for X, and so I'm going to give them X. And often there's an artistic part of you that's going, yeah, I got another way to do it. And I know this is what they want, but I'd love to show them this. And make sure you record all those ways that whenever something is speaking to you, try it. Just try it. As they say, most directors, if they've, especially on video, shooting on HD today, they don't have to worry about the cost of every inch of film. And they'll say, okay, we're happy with what we need. So do one for yourself. And many editors will tell you that that's often the one that is ultimately used. Do a take for yourself. So there is one time when it is important to look straight into the camera, and that is for the slate. The slate is when you introduce yourself, and sometimes you say something like, hello, my name is Lisa Dalton. I am with KD Agency, and I am reading for the role of Mary Ellen. So something like that. And these days, it's often a section that you shoot separately and you edit it and you put it at the very end. And the nice thing about that is the first thing they see is the story. They see your audition, they see your work of art, and then they see you. And so this slate is really, it's the opportunity for you to do your personality audition. And it's very important that you allow yourself to do that radiating to the camera lens, through the lens, really, to them. And that in one way you can do that is to imagine that ball toss where you really radiate and sustain and allow your energy to be fully present directly through them, really making contact with that imaginary single individual audience person. So that's the slate, and I do recommend that you do it as yourself, not as the character. And that's also a good reason why we put it at the end, because they will form an opinion about you and whether or not you're the right type and whether you have the essential qualities and can act within the first 5 seconds of seeing your video. And so you want them to immediately get a taste for you as the character, and then you reveal yourself. So if you were doing a dialect or an accent of some kind in your character, you would want to not do that in your slate so that they can hear what you actually sound like. Just another tip regarding the recording and your own work, make sure that you hold or sustain that final moment of anything, whether it's the scene that you're acting in. So again, like our archetypal gestures or our ball toss, we want to keep the energy radiating for at least a good 3 seconds after you finish before you go to turn off your recording, so that you have an edit point and that your last scene doesn't look something like that. You go right from the end of the scene to cutting and you have no ability to sustain for the edit. So make sure that you have, same as in the beginning, that you have a moment from the time you turn on the camera to when you're in your place and you call action basically internally. So you have a clear start and middle and end of your work of art that does not include the technical task of turning on and turning off the camera and the recording. Okay?
This whole technique is giving you the real joy, as you said, to do auditions. Because if I wouldn't have the technique, I needed to draw from a single thing that it's my personal or the thing that I know already. But now I can go to each tool and, and dig with it into the audition, and I can do 30 auditions for the same thing. This is it's genius. it's very, it's fun. It makes me want to do auditions.
I want to introduce Anjali Hutchinson here. So there is one time when it is important to look straight into the camera, and that is for the slate. The slate is when you introduce yourself, and sometimes you say something like, hello, my name is Lisa Dalton. I am with KD Agency, and I am reading for the role of Mary Ellen. So something like that. And these days, it's often a section that you shoot separately and you edit it and you put it at the very end. And the nice thing about that is the first thing they see is the story. They see your audition, they see your work of art, and then they see you. And so this slate is really, it's the opportunity for you to do your personality audition. And it's very important that you allow yourself to do that radiating to the camera lens, through the lens, really, to them. And that in one way you can do that is to imagine that ball toss where you really radiate and sustain and allow your energy to be fully present directly through them, really making contact with that imaginary single individual audience person. So that's the slate, and I do recommend that you do it as yourself, not as the character. And that's also a good reason why we put it at the end, because they will form an opinion about you and whether or not you're the right type and whether you have the essential qualities and can act within the first 5 seconds of seeing your video. And so you want them to immediately get a taste for you as the character, and then you reveal yourself. So if you were doing a dialect or an accent of some kind in your character, you would want to not do that in your slate so that they can hear what you actually sound like. And just another tip regarding the recording and your own work, make sure that you hold or sustain that final moment of anything, whether it's the scene that you're acting in. So again, like our archetypal gestures or our ball toss, we want to keep the energy radiating for at least a good 3 seconds after you finish, before you go to turn off your recording, so that you have an edit point and that your last scene doesn't look something like that. You go right from the end of the scene to cutting and you have no ability to sustain for the edit. So make sure that you have, same as in the beginning, that you have a moment from the time you turn on the camera to when you're in your place and you call action basically internally. So you have a clear start and middle and end of your work of art that does not include the technical task of turning on and turning off the camera and the recording. Okay. Yeah, Anjali is one of our NMCA certified teachers. She is your department chair at Bucknell University in Pennsylvania.
I just finished being department chair, so yes, but I was.
Yes. And very soon, very, very soon, a book is going to be coming out called Michael Chekhov and Sanford Meisner, Collisions and Convergence in Actor Training, which Anjali has, is the creator, editor of, and which Will Kilroy and I are contributing authors of. So Anjali, welcome.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I've been listening and enjoying it so much, and sort of taking all my notes. But I had two questions. One is about the archetypes, Lisa, those beautiful archetypes you mentioned when you're looking at a side that you get. You spoke about hero, villain, victim, bystander, and I'm wondering, are there other archetypes that might show up when you're looking at sides often that that might be helpful for us to think about? And then my other question was super technical about backgrounds, about choosing backgrounds, and do actors or our students of different races, do we offer different kinds of backgrounds and lighting? So I guess if you could just address that a little bit, that would be awesome.
Okay, so regarding the archetypes, when we break it into a script, what becomes important is if we go to thinking, feeling, and willing, the level of authority, the level of intelligence, and the level of emotional availability. Those, the different archetypes have different balances or distributions of authority. So the villain has a low level of emotional capacity and a high level of authority, for example. And depending on whether they're a thug or the mastermind, their intelligence rides up and down. So the victim has very low level authority, very high emotional availability. Their intelligence level somewhere in the midline is not usually a relevant question. So just as an example, so you can imagine the hero and your witnesses. Witnesses have a mid-level across the board. Maybe if they're a court witness, they have a high level of intelligence, but and authority in that, they have intellectual authority. So to look at that, there then become the basic employment types, the types of employment. So the teacher, the mother, the father, the the nurse, all those, it becomes the archetype becomes the type of employment, what it is that is central to this story. Like going back to Gail's character, because it's such a great model, the grandmother is important. So she must be grandmother hero, right? But she cannot just be hero. She has to have grandmotherness in her. And if we don't plausibly buy into her as a grandmother, it doesn't matter how heroic she is. So that's why the archetype is, understanding the archetype that's being called for. So yes, the subdivisions under those become many. And as I said, they're mostly profession driven in today's storytelling. And then the question about, depending on your ethnicity, it is, first of all, it's a lighting. We need to know something about lighting, and the lighting or the light source must be from behind the camera onto you. And if it's not from behind the camera, with these phones and computers, you're going to have darkness. So Dominic, I'm gonna jump over to your video. I'm going to spotlight you, and we see that Dominic has behind him the light streaming in over his shoulder. And so this is creating a very, very different effect. The focal point of that screen now becomes the window, and Dominic is not the focal point. If Dominic were able to change his camera around so that he were looking out the window over his camera, we would see Dominic fully, and much more light would be on his face. Now, the darker the complexion, the more you need to make sure that your light is suitable and reflects, is able to reveal the nuances of your performance. So that is very, important. And corners are great. So to go, back to Dominic for a moment, Dominic's, the corner behind him works really well to create an interesting sense of depth. And if that corner were, if the corner were neutral, then that would work. So I'm gonna just remove this, and you in effect see that I have kind of have now a corner behind me. Now this surface is so shiny. If I remove this, there, and I would remove the stand behind me, but I could create a corner something like this, right? And it gives me a depth. Hold on. Would give me a kind of depth behind me if I cleared those obstacles, as opposed to a flat background like that. So you can play with that, but again, it needs to be clean. Otherwise, it's far superior to have one solid background, one solid color background. It puts everything on you. If I stand up, it'll be easier. It's all about me now, right? Because there's nothing to distract. And the light is good. It's coming from in front of me. And if I turn this way, you see the difference. You have all that kind of distraction, etc. Lighting problems. Aha, look at that. So getting clear, a clear frame. How's that, Anjali?
That's great. Thank you so much. That's really helpful.
Yes, I think we should make in future talk about the question with the archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
This is still a very important theme, and even what is it, what we mean with it, and how we can handle it. And you gave now a very nice example, and also then the demonstration with the video. That's very nice, very good. And I'm a little bit asking, and maybe we should have a talk about the archetype in future.
Sounds like a plan.
All what we spoke about that has at least also to do with that when you read the script, can you imagine the scene? Can you imagine the character? Can you build really a clear imagination of it? And out of that, one can get leaded deeper and deeper into it. And this is the only thing I wanted to add to our talk for now.
Yes, I love actually recommending that you act out the whole scene the way it would be shot. Going back to Gail's scene, for example, I go in my car and practice it in the car to find out what that is about. Go out and practice it the way I think it will be shot. Then come into video space, and I have that visceral memory and imagination to live through, and I discover little things that I wouldn't have. So yes.
Very important, and also very important to imagine it all from the point of view of that character of the scene, not from my personal private point of view. But we have discussed it in the first video, I think.
This is our fifth video on the creative process.
I don't know anymore.
So if you haven't seen the other four, please check for those. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today from all over the world. And hello, Joanne Yarrow from Syracuse. Where are you, Ben?
I'm in Liverpool, England.
Gail, thank you very much, and Dominic, and for giving us a demonstration with this room. And also Angelia for your question, and Paul for your question. Thank you, everybody, and also to Ophir, and hopefully see you next time.